No, you're not seeing this wrong. This isn't an April Fool's joke. This isn't me trying to be weird and cocky. I bring some of that on myself. I guess you could say your doubt is normal. I know you won't leave just because of some silly jokes like that. Oh. Before we get into what makes Normal Kirby so interesting, and believe me, you are in for a very wild ride, help me achieve a normal workload by giving the video a like and ringing the notification bell after subscribing. Making YouTube videos while working full-time is decidedly not normal, and the more of those that I get, the sooner I get to focus on these. Also, vote for what the September spotlight will be in the comments. Voting's gonna end a bit early this time on September 7th, 2022. So if you're watching this video afterwards, tell me what you think about normal. Which is actually a pretty loaded question, but you know what I mean. Now then, on with the show. Yeah, I don't actually know how to open this one. The votes for Normal Kirby have been picking up steam recently, and I wanted to encourage people to vote for some weirder options like this, so I, the CEO of these videos, CEO stands for Copyability or Spotlight after all, I decided to make August's about Normal Kirby. It's, I don't know, 3 weeks late or something, but better late than never, right? Hey, I've been uploading almost every single day this month. Cut me some slack, please. Oh, and where else to start but the very beginning? Kirby's Dream Land, aka the only time I'll ever get to talk about this game, and a spotlight. Even from the very beginning, Kirby's movement was crucial to speedrunning. Surprising, since there's not even a dash. Kirby had to make do with walking in this one. Look at that light strut, what a champ. For the sake of spotlights, there are some very important things to note about Normal that apply to every single game going forward. Most importantly, there are minute differences with Normal that make it more or less effective for every single game going forward. For example, in Kirby's Dream Land, there are many instances where getting hit will actually give you a slight boost to your jump, meaning you'll actually want to take damage. In future games, aside from mixed setups, you'll want to avoid that, since you'll likely have an ability. For another example, what happens when you land on an enemy varies from game to game, but in Dreamland 1, when you're in the air for long enough and enter that freefall state, you don't bounce off of enemies. You still defeat them, but you don't bounce. This is huge, as it becomes Normal's fastest way of dealing with enemies compared to later games where, hey, who cares? I have fire, I'm just gonna use burning and destroy them all anyway. Lol GG's. There are some consistencies, namely with floating being the #1 way to slow you down. They're very much intended, as floating above enemies makes the game less exciting for a casual audience. But what that means for Dreamland, since you have no abilities, is that you need to plan for every instance the game will want you to float. Can you get around it by jumping or inhaling? If you inhale close enough to an enemy, the startup effectively doesn't happen, so you don't have to worry about that. And if you have to float, then how can you keep the speed moving as fast as you can, and how quickly can you stop floating? A big part of the Kirby's Dream Land speedrun is the flow of it. Just keep moving. And doing that with Normal is thankfully very much doable. It may be your only option, but if nothing else, it was built to be very powerful, meaning you can get through levels very quickly. The world record for Dreamland 1 is just under 11 minutes, which is pretty good, albeit the game itself is very short. But still, I wanted to talk about Dreamland since, again, when will I ever get to talk about it again in one of these? But also because it gave me a chance to explain how Normal works for those who may not know. Which, I don't know how you got here if that was the case, but I'm looking out for you, alright? With all of the basics out of the way, I don't want this video going on literally forever, so I'm going to draw a line in the sand and identify what exactly Normal Kirby is. To be Normal Kirby, which is now different from being just Kirby apparently, you need to be in a game with copy abilities. Now, this is what separates Normal Kirby from Kirby Kirby. Kirby, that's the name you should know. The exception is Dreamland 1, since, you know, that predates them. You also need to be controlling Kirby, not controlling, say, a puzzle board or day-to-day. Lastly, for platformers only, Normal Kirby has to be traditional. The movement and mechanics for both functionality and visuals need to reflect this, so things like Yarn Kirby A, get the axe nay, if you catch my drift, yay. Meaning, the games with no Normal Kirby at all, I wouldn't list them normally, but come on, when am I gonna get the chance to talk about some of these games in a spotlight again? Like with Dreamland, are Pinball Land, Avalanche, Toy Box, Star Stacker, Super Star Stacker, Tilt and Tumble, Epic Yarn, Mass Attack, Rainbow Curse, Fighters Deluxe, Drum Dash Deluxe, Kirby Clash Deluxe, Blowout Blast, Battle Royale, Extra Epic Yarn, Super Kirby Clash, and Fighters 2. Now, the list of games to cover is still pretty heckin' big, so I'm setting another ground rule. That one being, the games where Normal isn't very good or there's not much to say on them, we're gonna lump them together as one. Traditional or spin-off, the logic is basically the same, so I'll list those real quick and then explain why Normal Kirby isn't normally used. Hey, jeez, these jokes practically write themselves. I should have done this spotlight way sooner. Anyway, these games will be Kirby's Adventure, Kirby Superstar, Dreamland 2, Dreamland 3, Crystal Shards, Squeak Squad, Superstar Ultra, Return to Dreamland, Dream Collection, Trouble Deluxe, Planet Robobot, Star Allies, Dream Course, Block Ball, and Air Ride. So why isn't Normal Kirby very good in these games? The interesting thing is Normal kind of is good, at least by technicality. See, you always have to have Normal Kirby around at all times. Normal is the default Kirby, and even when you have a copy ability, the base movement of Kirby is always tied to Normal. This leads to one of two reasons, maybe a mixture of the two, for why Normal Kirby wouldn't be very good. First, copy abilities are just that good. This one is the easier of the two to explain, as it kinda goes without saying. The whole point of copying abilities is to get more out of Kirby. Why use Normal in Superstar when you can use Jet or Plasma? Or Wheel and Squeak Squad? Even looking at 100% runs for a game like Return to Dreamland, where you need to lose your ability a lot for super abilities and another dimension auto-scrollers, you're only using Normal as a means to get other copy abilities. If you're even using Normal at all. If you're doing a 2-player run, you're probably going to use Meta Knight in these cases. Granted, that still makes Normal better than a fair few amount of the abilities, but if you're using it out of necessity rather than choice, we don't qualify that as good around here in each part. The second part, and one that isn't immediately as obvious, is that oftentimes a game will have some kind of secondary mechanic that renders Normal obsolete. Looking at Dreamland 3, Normal is actually not that bad. It's one of your more consistent movement options, and unlike Burning, it never loses steam. I didn't even mean for that one to happen. But that really doesn't matter because the annual buddies are in the game and most, if not all of them, have better movement than Normal. The same applies for stuff like Dreamland 2, Multiplayer Return to Dreamland, and Air Ride City Trial. Yeah, it's easy to forget you can hop off of vehicles or stars, whatever, in that game, but you can. I kind of already mentioned this, but what's cool about Normal is that, because you technically always have it, there are still cool things that you can do with it. Just because it's outclassed doesn't mean it's useless. I mentioned Dreamland 2 earlier, but Kirby loves slopes in that game. Jumping off of one makes Kirby go, whoa, crazy fast. Or, in the case of a game like Dream Collection, it's faster to use a normal slide than it is to, say, use Sword's dash attack in many instances. And of course, I'd be remiss not to mention the boss rushes, where Normal is your only option to start, but again, you're only using it out of necessity, not by choice. Even in, of all games, Kirby's Adventure? Yeah, the one where Tornado makes basically every ability look worse than Beam Attack! The momentum you can get from sliding off ledges is invaluable. Combine that with Tornado movement and you can go absurd horizontal distances. Tornado is doing most of the work, hence why I didn't talk about it later, but in my first draft of this script, I actually did have it as a genuinely good, ability. To be frank, I would argue that it's one of the best abilities in Adventure, but since that game has like 3 good abilities, Normal didn't quite make the cut. I gave it its own paragraph at least, which is more than I can say for most abilities from Adventure, which is kind of sad actually. My point is, Normal always has something going for it, but for the sake of the spotlight, we're just looking for the good stuff. And now, with Kirby's Normal Adventure as our tasty, scrumptious appetizer, here are the good stuff. To start out, and this is a perfect transition by the way, I dazzle even myself, we talk about Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland. Now, to understand why Normal is legit good in this game, we need to look at a few factors. First, what are the factors that make Normal not good? External factors like animal buddies or helpers? Nope, not here. This is just Kirby on an adventure. Kirby helping solve a nightmare. Yeah. So what about the copy abilities? Stuff like Ball, High Jump, Wheel, Burning, Stone, Spark, Sword, they're all pretty great. So how does Normal hold up? When you have an ability as good as Jet, for example, why use it? Like I said before, right? And therein lies the answer, wonderful viewer. Checkmate. In a game with 1 or 2 good abilities, you would just stick with those. But when you have so many, and you constantly switch around, especially when most of the good abilities don't help much with movement, it gives Normal much more of a chance to shine. But that's only half of the recipe. What makes this a gourmet-approved meal is that Normal, by repeatedly jumping, can move faster. Of course, if Normal can do it, all abilities can do it, but in most instances, only high jump, burning, and wheel are going to help you move quicker. Wheel and burning are not so great against bosses, and while high jump is, it loses hard to wheel and burning in terms of horizontal movement. So if you have one of those two and a mini boss is coming up or something, your best bet is to grab an ability like Spark or Sword, do what needs to be done, and move on. If that boss doesn't have wheel or burning, then guess what? You still got Normal. That perfect availability really comes in clutch. There's also some very notable instances in the early to mid game where, if you have an ability, you can get rid of it and inhale another enemy to get a double star. This instantly KOs mini bosses and is used a few times during runs. There's 2 things I want to note with this. 1, yes, I'm counting this for Normal. You may need an ability to do this. Well, I mean, not really, but in some instances you do. The ability in question doesn't matter. The fact that you're spitting out a double star, something only Normal can do, is what's important. And it's the same thing with what I was talking about before. Second, because this happens in the early and the mid game, before you really have to worry about having certain abilities to find and press switches, this is applicable for both any percent and hundo. That's pretty huge, considering there are abilities across the entire series that not only struggle to find usage in one of those categories, but even ones that can't be bothered to be good in either. As a whole, while not incredible or anything, Normal is a lot better than you'd expect in Nightmare. But then, as the doubters and naysayers were naysaying Normal, doubting that it could be that good again and it was just a fluke, if anyone can actually find people saying that, let me know, that sounds really funny, Amazing Mirror happens. Now, Amazing Mirror has even crazier abilities than Nightmare, and while more are used overall, less of them are crucial to the run. Really, Wheel is the only one that's super important, with the rest being really, really good, but not dominant. That's fantastic for other abilities, but for Normal, that sounds like a disaster. But, unlike Nightmare, there is an external factor at play, one that makes Normal much better than it frankly has any right to be. And that factor is the world of Amazing Mirror. Now, that may not sound like it makes a lot of sense, but here's the thing. There are 9 worlds in Amazing Mirror, right? And one of them is Rainbow Route, an area with no main boss, so let's lower that number to 8. Actually, what I'm about to talk about doesn't apply in one instance, so let's lower it again to 7. Okay, lucky 7. After you beat a boss in Amazing Mirror, you collect the Mirror Shard and watch a short cutscene of the Mirror Shard attach itself to the mirror. It does a ba-ding, shines for a bit, the game goes back to Kirby, the Kirby dance happens, you return to the main hub, and you move on. You can probably tell by the footage in the background, but in case you're one of those crazies who likes to listen to YouTube, the game updates your progress as soon as the Mirror Shard does the ba-ding. Everything after that is just busy work, so instead of wasting time, you soft reset the game. All of this is very important information because, well, what happens when you reset the game? You get to see the title screen again? Oh yeah, you love that title screen. But relevant to us, you lose your ability. Back to Normal you go. Now, in some instances, the optimized route is to simply run to a door, grab Wheel really quick, and get a move on again. And this is still valuable since you do this multiple times, and Normal being so quick, what with the jumping thing from Nightmare still working and all, saves you good time. But it isn't cool, you know? This is where mix setups come in, and while I normally don't talk about mix setups, since the actual setup isn't relevant, plus, you know, potential mix spotlight one day, who knows, the ones in Amazing Mirror really only work because of how Normal is. I mean, okay, you can mix with Normal, and that's why it's good, but mixes like the first Wheel mix, or this Foley mix, or even the UFO Fire mix in Onion Ocean, that really has nothing to do with the fact that you can soft reset, all things that only save as much time as they do because Normal is really fast, Normal's air puff works the way that it does, and the inhale range is so good. Still not a defining ability, but wow, is it weird that I can actually talk about it. Oh, and to quickly explain this, Normal isn't 3 for 3 thanks to Squeeze Squad. Not only is Wheel so absurdly good in that game that it vaporizes almost every other ability, but the bottom screen storing abilities, there's that external factor again, makes it hard for Normal to find much use beyond getting that first mix. Oh well. Another game I want to talk about quickly is Dream Buffet. Now, this game is very new, and there's obviously very little to be done in regards to speedrunning, but for any versus-style Kirby game, we like to look at multiplayer options on here. I don't want to get into too much detail since, again, it's so new. For all I know, Normal is better than every ability in the game, but Normal has some interesting quirks to it, namely for movement and the final round. For movement, the games take a cue from Dreamland 2. Kirby loves slopes, and while going up them makes you lose some speed, going down will make you move a lot faster. You can combine the speed you get with a jump to give you a really good speed boost. Some abilities can take advantage of this too, but to continuously beat this point into the ground, which honestly sounds kinda yummy since that ground is probably cake, you'll always have Normal no matter what. For a game like Dream Buffet, where abilities can only be found in item boxes and even then are totally random, having Normal at all times consistently is more valuable than ever. Now, for the final round, things are interesting. It's a Battle Royale mode, not like Kirby Battle Royale, where your goal is to knock out enemies with abilities to steal their strawberries. It sounds harsh, but it's a Kirby world out there in Kirby's birthday cake. Anyway, while this sounds simple enough, if you just activate an ability, chances are your opponent will dodge. Things get intense, and any good player will be more aware of their surroundings to make sure they can escape. But if you run into an opponent with Normal Kirby, something that's easier to do compared to most abilities, since, again, you always have it and you can do fun momentum shenanigans, you'll both be temporarily stunned, giving you an advantage to use your ability and knock him out. Again, Dream Buffet is really new, and Normal's perks may just vanish one day when people get a better hang of abilities, but if people look at the timestamps and see Dream Buffet, they'll probably watch the video for longer, and I need people for watch time and money in. So we've got 2 games left. I've saved these 2 for last for a specific reason, and this is because Normal in these games isn't just good. Normal is legitimately great in these, and if you've watched my other spotlights, you probably know what at least one of them is. But to save Normal's best for last, we need to start by talking about the newest Kirby game to catch the attention of literally everybody. Sorry, Dream Buffet. Kirby and the Forgotten Land. So how good is Normal in this game? Well, if you head over to speedrun.com, you'll see the highly populated any percent category first, as always, with a world record of 137.50. That is insanely good, and while I do want to give major credit to the dozens of people who find tech and practice these runs to get such good times, then you look under the miscellaneous runs to see that no copy abilities is a category and that the world record for that is 154.46. Yeah, you can finish Kirby and the Forgotten Land with no copy abilities slightly over 15 minutes slower than with any copy ability. That's not that much time in the grand scheme of things. In fact, I did some maths, and at the time of this writing, if my math is wrong, I have an excuse. That's faster than 60% of the any percent runs on the leaderboard. That's crazy! First off, Normal in Forgotten Land doesn't have any of those external factors to deal with. Well, it technically does, I guess. Sorry, I'm a compulsive liar. But the mouthful modes, most of the time, can be skipped. In a normal-only run, you'd skip them slightly less since you need some extra Waddle Dees to advance through the game, but considering that Normal is faster than every single mouthful, aside from the car, you still want to mouthful as little as you can. And yes, you heard that right. Normal is actually fast? What the heck? Well, in some older Kirby games, but most prominently in the Return to Dreamland style games, sliding is your fastest method of movement around without an ability. The issue is that you have a lot of cooldown on your slide. You can slide ASAP to make the most of it, but that cooldown still exists. In Forgotten Land, the unthinkable happened. They made the slide lock onto enemies, and now it's really annoying and could genuinely kill whole runs. You can now cancel a slide at any time with a jump. Jumps themselves, or at least short hops, aren't any faster or slower than moving on the ground, but that doesn't matter. Sliding around is faster than what most abilities can offer. Forgotten Land ditched these superstar movesets in favor of a much simpler 1 or 2 move per ability approach, so the only abilities with good movement are Fire, Tornado, Needle, and Drill. Needle and Drill aren't seen as often for movement, but they are ever so slightly better. But remember what I said before about Nightmare in Dreamland? When the common denominator in something is normal, I'll give the credit to Normal. Well, you can combine these speed boosting moves for ability like Fire with the slide kick jump canceling or whatever you want to call it. To keep using fire as an example, you can use burning to do an aerial dash. Now, what happens when you combine that with the slide, kick, jump, whatever? You get slide, kick, jump, burning, burning. When you land with that second burning, you're basically already on the ground, so you can near immediately loop the process. The same works with needle and drill and tornado and yeah, really any ability that lets you move. Sorry, sleep. Normal is good in every single Forgotten Land category, no matter what, with one exception that we'll get to, because the slide kick is a crucial part of moving quickly. It's least effective with Tornado, for reasons I can get into when we talk about Tornado, we already did, but that doesn't mean it's bad or anything. And besides, Fire is no slouch of an ability either, and without the slide kick jump stuff, Fire can't even come close to competing with Tornado in many instances. Normal isn't perfect though, and this is shown most clearly against bosses more than anything else. The good news here is that Normal is actually not bad, especially against the early game boss fights. In fact, during the demo meta, Normal was actually considered to be the best option when compared to Sword, Bomb, and Ice. Ice is obviously number 1 now, but still, not too shabby. Well, I guess Sword 2 is also considered much better, but if we're not talking about ability upgrades, Normal, not that bad. Unfortunately, even with the limited ability movesets, having to wait for a boss to attack, while fine for the early game, starts losing a lot of time, big time, towards the mid-game. And since the Coliseum meta is insanely broken, Normal doesn't stand a chance. Still, it's really good. But what if I told you that we could do better? The really good wasn't all we had to settle for, that there is a game where Normal is actually the best ability in the entire game. It exists, and for anyone watching who knows their Kirby games, you probably saw it coming. It's Canvas Curse. And if you've played Canvas Curse or know the speedrun, a few reasons are probably going off in your mind already. But let's get the most obvious points out of the way and work our way up. First, and most obvious, is that Canvas Curse, when you tap Kirby, you perform a dash. What else does tapping Kirby do? Use an ability, if of course, you have one. By default, this makes Normal one of the most efficient abilities in the game. Abilities like Beam, which do next to nothing for movement, or Tornado, that basically make you slower, are instantly worse. Another aspect of Canvas Curse that really helps out Normal is what happens at the end of every level. You do the jump minigame, there's a Kirby dance, and just like before, you already know what happens, unless you aren't actually watching. You're out there. I know it. Just like in Amazing Mirror, you soft reset to save the most time. But even if this was like Dreamland 2, where you kept your ability after soft resetting, it wouldn't matter because when you finish a level regardless, you lose your ability. You can't lose Normal now, can you? Yet another thing that really helps out Normal is the boss fights. Or lack thereof. Unlike Forgotten Land, which skipped boss day at the gym, Normal is prepared for boss fights, and how the boss fights are all minigames. It doesn't have to struggle with them because they don't exist. Well, I guess my compulsive lying is at it again because there is one boss fight at the very end of the game. Well, there's kinda two. Leave me alone, okay? But even then, Normal is the only ability that you can use, and dashing into bosses, or is it just one boss singular? Deals a surprising amount of damage. So yes, Normal either doesn't have to worry about bosses, or is very good against them. I tell you to take your pick, but your pick is both. We're not done though still, because another thing that helps Canvas Curse is the lack of an ability that does everything. Typically, Normal struggles if the game is dominated by one or two abilities, but it doesn't have that issue because, well, I mean, you'll lose it after every level, but even if it did, Wheel and Burning are both really good for moving horizontally, but they don't do much for moving up. Burning fares a little bit better, but not amazingly. And there's also abilities like Needle that get a crazy speed boost when moving on ink, but none of them can do everything. Normal, even if it can be outclassed in certain areas, kinda can do everything and has the best overall balance. But all of this would just be kinda, I don't know, fine if it weren't for one last thing. See, these are all great things about Normal, but you're still just using Normal because you kinda have to, right? If you had the choice, you'd at least opt for Burning or Wheel in most cases. Well, the footage has probably spoiled this already, but if you draw a circle with the ink for Kirby to move through, he'll perform a long dash that lasts as long as the ink does. This is huge and kind of eliminates the need for a copy ability in a lot of instances, and is used very commonly throughout a Canvas Curse run. Okay, sure, it's technically slower than things like Wheel and Burning still, but these abilities have severe limitations to how they can be used, like I said. Wheel has some pretty long startup and struggles with doing anything other than going in a straight line. Burning doesn't have these issues, but it doesn't last as long as Wheel does, and it can lead to things going wrong with it far more often. Both also have the issue of availability, not even being in a combined total of half the levels in the entire game. Normal is around for every level, has far more versatility than either ability, and has ways to keep the speed going in every level of the game, no exceptions. So, we finally reached the end of this spotlight. Bet you didn't think it would be that long, huh? At the end of all things, the same question must be asked, albeit a very odd-sounding one. Is Normal Kirby a good Kirby? Obviously, we know all Kirbys are good Kirbys, but is it an effectively good Kirby? I'm sure some will be surprised to hear this, but kinda, yeah. I wouldn't say Normal is some stellar ability that defines Kirby speedrunning, but considering that Normal is the default, the ability list, the one you're literally just stuck with when you're trying to get something better, yeah, it's pretty good. It's among the abilities to have appeared in the most amount of games, but in most of them, it's just fine. By design, it can't really be awful, but it can't really be that good either, which is why the games in which it's really good in stand out so much. The stuff like Dream Buffet was fun to talk about, but Forgotten Land and especially Canvas Curse stand out due to how good Normal is. In the bigger picture, while I would say Normal is on the lower end of the abilities that we've covered, it's certainly far from the worst. And you could probably say that's not normal. Oh, well, that was the spotlight. Thank you all so much for watching to the very end, and I hope you enjoyed this really weird one. Remember that voting lasts about a week this time, so get those votes in pronto by leaving a comment. And, of course, let me know what you think of Normal Kirby, and I'll see you for the next spotlight or video or whatever. I've been Claire Kirby Fan, and thank you all one last time for watching, and I will see you around. Bye!